Now let's look at the true heart of the TRIMS methodology, which is the questions that make up each template. The Answer Questions window allows you to look at each question individually. The first thing you'll see is the question number and the text of the question itself. This will be phrased in either future tense or current tense, depending on whether we are before or after the begin activity date. To the right of the text, you'll find the last updated date for this question, and below that, you'll find navigation buttons, which work the same way as the template level buttons described earlier. Right below the question text is the current compliance status of the question. Valid options for this field are yes, no, unknown, not applicable, and partial. This last option may be used to provide partial credit for a question, although this practice is not normally recommended. Note that we use the word compliant instead of completed. That difference is significant. You do not need to complete an activity in order to earn the points for the question. You are considered to be compliant if you have a plan to address the issue, and that plan is documented somewhere. For instance, let's look at question 2.6.2. Will design engineers be required to participate in and use the results of design analyses? As long as there are documented corporate design standards that call for this to happen, you can be considered compliant. However, this compliance is contingent on actually performing the required analysis, at which point compliant and completed would be synonymous. Next to the compliant field is the weight of the question. This determines the significance of this question relative to the other questions in this template. Next to the weight, you can see the total weight of all of the questions in this template. Since this question is only worth 4 points out of a total of 174, we can see that this question represents about 2% of the risk in this template. Below the compliance field is the space to record the reference documentation. This is one of the most important parts of TRIMS because without it you cannot be compliant. The TRIMS definition of compliance is based on documentation, which must be referenced here. This prevents organizations from claiming to be compliant simply because the standard process calls for it. It is not uncommon for parts of the standard process to be abbreviated or skipped completely, especially when a deadline is pressing. Requiring reference documentation is TRIMS' way of validating the answers and ensuring the quality of the results. If the reference documentation is an actual document, in this case, the minutes of the engineer's design analysis meeting, it can be linked to the element file using the reference file field, which will then serve as the reference documentation for this question. If a file has been attached, it can be launched using this button. Windows will automatically display the document using the appropriate software. The next major item is the Next Action field. Another one of TRIMS' important principles is the idea of continuous review. It is not enough for a risk management program to answer all of the questions once. To successfully mitigate risk, you have to return to each question on a periodic basis and make sure that you are still compliant. The Next Action field identifies what action has to take place next for the question to remain compliant. The due date identifies when that action must be completed. If this date is passed and the action hasn't been completed, the action becomes overdue, and the question will automatically be set to unknown. This makes the question non-compliant and increases the template's risk level. The Next Action field itself is very short, forcing you to summarize the action. Clicking on this button here pulls up the action list editor. This window provides a complete set of tools for adding or deleting actions, or for marking actions complete or incomplete. You can click on this button to edit the entire action item, which includes a longer description field where the action can be described in more detail. It is possible to associate multiple action items with an individual question, effectively creating a complete action list or risk management plan. The next action item is always considered to be the incomplete action item with the earliest due date. For convenience, the approximate time remaining to complete the next action is displayed next to the due date. You can mark an item complete from the action list editor or from the main Answer Questions window by clicking the button with the green check mark on it. Below the due date is the action list summary display, which will show you at a glance how many actions are associated with the current question and how many of those actions have been completed. There is one square for each action. Solid squares represent completed actions, and empty squares represent incomplete actions. You can also bring up the action list editor by double-clicking on the summary display. The last item associated with the question is the performer. This is a personnel record which works exactly the same way as the initiate, monitor, and approve fields for the template, the only difference being that you can have a different performer for each question. To the right of the performer is a box that displays the managers assigned to this template. These are here for reference, and you can access the personnel information for these people by clicking on their names. Well, that covers all of the data elements in this window, but before we finish, let's look at some additional features designed to help you out. TRIMS includes built-in links to the know-how and BMP database programs if you have them installed on your system. If you're looking at a question and you don't understand it as well as you'd like, you can click on the Know-How button. This will automatically launch the Know-How program and then perform a search using terms relevant to the question that you are viewing. You can select a book from the results, repeat the search, and hopefully find some information that is helpful. Know-How even keeps the text of the original question visible at all times, just for reference. Once you understand the basis for the question and its implications for your program, the BMP database can help you search for companies with experience in this area that you might be able to contact for assistance. Last but not least is the online help. We've covered a lot of ground here. If you forget what something is or how to use it, the online help can be a handy reference. Once we're done entering data, an asterisk will appear next to the name of the element, showing that we've made changes to the file. You will need to save your changes. You can do this by clicking on the Save Element button. Don't worry about forgetting though. TRIMS will prompt you when you exit if you still have unsaved changes. This concludes managing process risks. The next lesson will show you how to edit product risks and problems.